using her small arms to push the wheelchair over the rough floors. Martha and Patricia acted as though Ivy didn't exist. They went on with their lives as if nothing had happened. But in her heart, Ivy knew that she had to endure. She was only 14 years old now, but she knew that in just 2 years everything would change. Her fortune, her mother's legacy, would finally come to her, and when that day arrived, she would make sure Patricia and Martha paid for all the suffering they had caused her. But for now, Ivy kept her head down, waiting and planning for the day when she would take back everything that was rightfully hers. Patricia's new boyfriend, Fred, had become a regular figure in the house. He smelled of alcohol. His eyes always red from drinking too much, and his temper was unpredictable. Whenever he was around, the atmosphere grew heavy with tension. Fred didn't even acknowledge Ivy, except when he needed something from her. "Hey girl," he would grunt, his voice thick with drunkenness. "Go fetch me some beer." And Ivy, still recovering from her injuries, would struggle to push her wheelchair out of the house, drag herself to the nearby store, and buy Fred his drinks. Sometimes she'd return so late at night that her body ached from exhaustion, but no one cared. Martha, who was now in her early teens, had grown crueler. She mocked Ivy constantly, laughing at how slow she moved in her wheelchair. "Look at her," Martha would say to her friends, "rolling around like an old woman." They would giggle and point, while Ivy kept her head down, ignoring the insults, determined not to let their words hurt her. At school, Ivy's struggles continued. After being home for so long because of her injuries, she was now in the same class as Martha. This gave Martha even more power over her. Ivy had always been a bright student, but the constant bullying from Martha and her friends made school unbearable. They would trip her, laugh at her when she fell, and spread cruel rumors about her. No matter how hard Ivy tried to focus on her studies, she couldn't escape the torment. Every night, Ivy cried silently in her bed, wishing things could be different. She missed her mother more than ever and often whispered to the empty room, "Mama, I wish you were here. I don't know how much longer I can do this." But deep inside, she held on to the promise that her mother's fortune would one day be hers, and that kept her going. She knew that when she turned 16, she would finally be free. One afternoon, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived at the house, sealed with a gold crest. Patricia, curious, tore it open, and her eyes widened in surprise. It was an invitation to the most prestigious event in the city, Prince Ade's 16th birthday celebration. Prince Ade was the son of the King of Lagos, and his birthday party was known to be the grandest event of the year. Only the most respected families were invited, and the invitation was addressed to Ivy. Patricia's lips curled into a sneer. How could Ivy, the girl she treated like a servant, receive such an invitation? Didn't make sense. But then she remembered something. Ivy's mother had been one of the most respected women in Lagos before she passed away. Ivy's family name carried weight, and that's why the invitation had come. Patricia's mind began to spin with jealousy and greed. Martha, who was sitting nearby, peeked over Patricia's shoulder. "What is it, Mama?" she asked. "It's an invitation to Prince Ade's birthday party," Patricia said, her voice dripping with envy. Martha's eyes lit up. "I want to go. Mama, I want to go." Patricia smiled wickedly. "Don't worry, Martha. You'll go, but not as Ivy." Later that night, Patricia pulled Ivy aside, her voice as sweet as honey, something Ivy hadn't heard in a long time. "Ivy, dear, there's an important event coming up. You've been invited to Prince Ade's birthday party." Ivy's eyes widened with excitement. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was something to look forward to. "But," Patricia continued, her tone changing, "I don't think you're ready for such an event. It's too fancy for you, and after everything that's happened, don't you think it's best to stay home?" Ivy's heart sank. "But my name was on the invitation," she whispered. Patricia's fake smile disappeared. "You'll go, but on one condition. You're going as Martha's maid." Ivy's eyes filled with confusion. "Martha's maid?" "Yes," Patricia said, her voice growing colder. "Martha will go as the guest, and you'll be her servant. It's the only way you're getting inside. Ivy felt a mix of disappointment and anger, but she knew there was no use in arguing. Patricia always had her way. The excitement of attending Prince Aid's birthday dimmed. Instead of being treated with respect, Ivy would be humiliated, forced to play the role of a servant to Martha. But she agreed, hoping at least to catch a glimpse of the grand event, even from the sidelines. The night of the party arrived, and Ivy dressed in a simple plain outfit, while Martha wore a glamorous gown that Patricia had bought just for the occasion. Ivy's heart ached as she watched Martha twirl in front of the mirror, smiling smugly at her reflection. At the entrance to the royal palace, guards stood at attention, checking each guest's invitation. When Patricia, Martha, and Ivy arrived, Martha confidently handed the invitation to the guard. But the guard, after looking closely at the invitation and then at Martha, frowned. "This invitation is not for you," he said, pointing to the name on the paper. "It says Ivy." Martha's face flushed with embarrassment. But I'm her cousin," she stammered. "I'm sorry, but only those whose names are on the invitation are allowed inside," the guard said firmly. Patricia, who had been standing nearby, quickly stepped forward. "It's just a misunderstanding," she said sweetly. "My daughter and Ivy are very close. Ivy has been feeling unwell, so she asked Martha to attend in her place. It's no trouble, is it?" The guard hesitated, glancing between Martha, Patricia, and Ivy. Ivy stood there silently, hoping that somehow, someway, she could be the one to enter, just for once. Finally the guard nodded. "Very well. But Ivy must come too. We don't allow substitutions without the person present." Patricia's plan to switch Martha and Ivy had been foiled. But Patricia wasn't done scheming. She whispered angrily to Martha, "Fine. You'll both go inside. But remember the plan, once you're in you switch roles. You're the guest and Ivy is your maid. Don't let anyone see you as anything less." Ivy's stomach churned with dread. She didn't want to go through with this. She didn't want to be humiliated in front of everyone, especially at such a prestigious event. But once again she had no choice. As they stepped through the grand doors of the palace, the sheer beauty of the event took Ivy's breath away. The golden chandeliers sparkled like stars, and the floor was polished so perfectly that it reflected the glowing lights above. Royal families from all over the region were there, dressed in their finest clothes. Ivy had never seen anything so grand in her life, but there was no time to enjoy it. Patricia's voice hissed in her ear, "Remember, you're just the servant tonight." And so, with her heart heavy and her spirits crushed, Ivy prepared herself for another night of suffering. Little did Patricia or Martha know, the wheels of fate were already turning. Ivy's fortune and destiny were drawing nearer, and the day of reckoning for Patricia's cruelty was closer than they could ever imagine. Martha, on the other hand, beamed with excitement. She walked around the ballroom like she was royalty herself, even though her invitation wasn't meant for her. She was desperate to be noticed by the high society that surrounded her, and she didn't care how it made Ivy feel. To Martha, Ivy was a nobody. "Hold my bag," Martha demanded, handing Ivy her sparkling clutch. "And stay behind me. Don't let anyone see you too close. Just be invisible." Ivy gripped the small bag tightly and trailed behind her cousin like a servant, exactly as Patricia had planned. Her eyes scanned the room, hoping to catch a glimpse of Prince Ade, the birthday boy, but she knew that this wasn't her night. The truth was, Ivy didn't belong here, not as long as Patricia and Martha had their say. As the night went on, Ivy watched Martha mingling with the other guests. She watched as Martha laughed loudly, told exaggerated stories, and acted as if she were the one invited to this grand event. But something strange began to happen. People started to notice that something wasn't right. They recognized Ivy's name from the invitation but didn't understand why she was lingering in the background, holding Martha's things like a servant. One woman, who had been a close friend of Ivy's mother, approached her with a concerned look. "Ivy, is that you?" she asked, her voice gentle but filled with worry. Ivy froze. She didn't know how to respond. Patricia had warned her not to speak out, But this woman's kind face reminded her of better days, when her mother was still alive. Martha quickly stepped in, flashing a forced smile. "Oh, Ivy's just feeling a little shy tonight," she said, pulling Ivy away from the woman. "She's always been quiet, haven't you, Ivy?" Ivy nodded, but the woman wasn't convinced. She stared after them, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "You look just like your mother, dear. You're more than you know," she said softly as Ivy and Martha moved away. "You're the servant, remember?" Ivy's heart pounded. She could feel all the eyes on them as Martha handed her the sparkling shawl she had been wearing. Martha's friends snickered from the corner of the room, watching eagerly to see what would happen next. Slowly, Ivy took the shawl and draped it over herself, her cheeks burning with shame. She knew what was coming. Martha was going to make a fool of her in front of everyone. "Bow!" Martha commanded loudly, as if Ivy were nothing but a slave. "Bow to your mistress." Ivy hesitated. She felt a lump forming in her throat, and her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to stand up for herself. But she was afraid. Afraid of Patricia, afraid of what Martha might do if she